Hello, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of our How to Succeed Without Feeling Like an Imposter program. Hopefully, many of you have been with us since the beginning. If you haven't, hello, my name is Melissa Kidd. I specialize in helping those in the finance sector to communicate more effectively. And a large part of my work is helping people to communicate more effectively with themselves. And so this is what today's session is largely around. So we are on part 3. We've spent some time trying to define what success means to us. Last time we looked at the imposter phenomenon, I'm calling it, up close, what it is, where it shows up, why it has such a strong hold on us. And in today's session, we're really looking at how do we start to change our relationship with it? How can we use some of the tools that have been shown to be really effective? The session is being recorded, so I will circulate a link to it afterwards, so you can watch it again if you like. So, today's session, we are going to be looking at how do we develop some strategies and skills to effectively relate to feelings of inadequacy, because this is largely what the imposter phenomenon feels like. It makes us feel like we're a fraud and that we're going to get found out. So there's an awful lot of fear and anxiety that comes with this condition, syndrome, phenomenon, whatever we're calling it. We'll then also look at how we relate to effective, unhelpful thoughts that keep us stuck, that overwhelm us, that consume us, and really hold us back from putting our hand up or prevent us from going for opportunities that we'd like to, put ourselves forward for. And lastly, I want to just give you a few tips for what to do or what to say back to yourself if you feel like you are in the middle of an attack. Linda, you've got your hand up, but it's a webinar. So if you wouldn't mind popping it through the chat, I can hopefully answer your questions then. If you're struggling to hear me, sometimes you just need to refresh your browser. That's been the thing in the past. I'll take questions at the end, as I mentioned, and I'll be asking for input as we go. The session lasts about an hour. So I wanted to recap what we covered last time, because we went over quite a lot of ground, and it's important that you've got an understanding of that before we can start to change our relationship. So we were talking about how many of us formed this not good enough or not as good as everyone thinks belief when we were young. It was through no fault of anyone or our parents. It was just messages that we picked up as a child. And because we were a child, we didn't really have much evidence to disprove it. So we just believe it, hook, line, and sinker, swallow it whole. And we also didn't want to jeopardize our relationship with our parents or our primary caregivers because our survival depended on them. So we needed to keep ourselves safe in order to survive. That was our paramount, that was our principal sort of operating mode. But now, so that worked back then. We kept us safe, it sort of, did its job, but that's saddled us, that belief has saddled us and followed us into later life. And now it's causing us a lot of suffering, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety of being found out, and it's holding us back. And for many of us, this has become an identity. We say, I'm someone with imposter syndrome, or I'm an imposter. We sort of label ourselves in this way. And I mentioned last time, the fact that it's being called a syndrome, I think is really unhelpful, because that has connotations of it being some sort of medical condition that once you've got it, you can't change it. And I am here to tell you, with these tools today and some discipline and some practice and support, you can change it. And because we've developed this label, this identity, this has meant that we've behaved in certain ways, like overworking, procrastinating, people pleasing, perfectionism, Those are kind of often some behavior, typical things that we do when we feel like we're an imposter. And last time I asked you to reflect on what some of those when you say I am this kind of person, which means I have to or I can't, there are a lot of unconscious things that we do because we've given ourselves that label. So as I mentioned, we've done this to keep ourselves safe. But even though there's lots of evidence to now suggest that we are good enough and we are smart enough and we have got to the places we've got to due to our own merit, it's not because of external factors like luck, timing, the fact that someone liked us, the fact that someone made a mistake. We have to start to recognize that it's not due to those factors we've got to where we are, but we are relating to that belief like it's still true. And this is where this gap appears between how we view ourselves, which is flawed and lacking and not good enough, and everybody else thinks that, how could you think that? You've risen to this position, you've achieved this. And we are thinking, but if only they knew, it's only going to be a matter of time till they find out. So we're relating to that as if it's still true, even though we're much older. So now it's up to us to change that label, to change that belief, to change the kind of person, the type of person that we want to become in order that we can flourish and do the things that we want to do with more ease and more confidence and less stress and anxiety. So that was a quick recap. And now I want to move on to some strategies and skills to help you relate to these feelings of inadequacy, which can be so big and powerful and debilitating. So before we do that, I just want to be clear on some terms because there's a lot of terminology that gets sort of banded around, and I want to be sure that we're all on the same page. So the first is self-worth. This is a feeling that you are a good person who deserves to be treated with respect. So you have innate goodness. Self-confidence is made up of courage, competence, and self-compassion. So its literal meaning is con, which means with, and fidere, which means trust. So it's that self-trust that you can handle whatever happens. Some of you mentioned last time that you're constantly doubting yourself. You're constantly triple checking things because you don't trust yourself enough. And self-confidence is this belief, this knowing that you can handle it, that you've got this, and even if it does go wrong, you'll be able to handle it. So it's this sort of self-trust. And then self-esteem is the degree to which we like or we value ourselves. And this really tends to fluctuate. So often it will depend on our circumstances. So if we're doing well, we might feel buoyed by that. And it's also contingent really on how much comparing we do. And we will often be comparing ourselves to our peers, to people who are like us, and more often than not, coming off worse. So we all compare ourselves. Our brain is wired to do that because we evolved in tribes, and hierarchy is really important. Status is a need for significance. So we're going to be doing it anyway. So I want to give you some tips on how to do it well. So to improve, compare the little things. So strategies, techniques, writing tactics. But to be miserable, compare the big things: your career path, your marriage, your net worth. Comparison is the thief of joy when applied broadly, but actually the teacher of skills when applied narrowly, says James Clear, who I've referenced a lot in the first session, who wrote Atomic Habits. So the other type of comparison you can do is this evaluative comparison, which is what many of us do, which is we look at someone and we're thinking, well, how do I compare? How do I compare now to this? Whereas what is a more helpful type of comparison is this aspirational version, which asks, can I be like them? So you choose someone who you find inspiring, or who's maybe just a few steps down the path, and you're wondering, can I be like them? And this really underlines what we were talking about in part one, which is, who is the type of person I want to become? And can I start to build up votes for that type of person by taking small actions? So hopefully you're starting to build a picture of the type of person that is confident, that can enjoy your success, that isn't doubting themselves to the extent that you have been doing, that feels a bit more confident and comfortable in your skin, that is able to take some small risks and realize that nothing went massively wrong. Or even if you did make a mistake, you realize, okay, well, what can I learn from it? Rather than beating yourself up or berating yourself for not knowing something. These are small little developments in the direction of starting to dismantle this sense of imposter phenomenon that we carry with us. So let's look at some longer term strategies. And I think really it rests on us building up our sense of self-worth. So my question to you is, what are some of the qualities that you value in others? How would you know if someone was a good person? And I'd love you to answer that in the chat. You can set it to everybody if you like, so that everybody can see your answer, or you can just direct it to me. How do you know if someone is a good person? What are some of the hallmarks? They've got compassion, they're kind-hearted, honesty, integrity, kindness, a lot of compassion. Yeah, balanced, considers others, they listen well, they're trustworthy, they're happy. Great. That's a nice collection. So when it comes to building up your worth, your homework from this session is to jot down 3 things that you did each day that you liked about yourself. Excuse me. So it could be, some of you've talked about listening well. That's a hallmark of a good person. Could you start to dial up your listening skills? Do you let someone out in traffic? Do you give someone a compliment? Little things that, these are the little votes of evidence that you are a good person by the metrics that you have created yourself. So it's a really nice exercise, that, because you're going through the day looking for opportunities to demonstrate to yourself that you are a good person. Also, what we know is that if you spot it in someone else, chances are you've got it. So all of those qualities that you've just listed, chances are you're pretty good at them already. The other thing to bear in mind is to try and not tie your sense of self-worth to any external metrics like your weight on the scales or your relationship status or your bank balance or your job title. Remember, you've got worth because you were born, and what we want to try and do is really infuse our being with goodness and to reflect on our own goodness. We're very good at recognizing where we're flawed and our sense of lack and wrongness and shame and things like that, and it's time to start paying attention to the goodness. One of the things that I did, which I found really helpful, and I learned this from Marissa Peer, who said, write "I am enough" on a postcard and put it in places that you see a lot, and just mutter it to yourself through the day. You could use it as passwords. And this, I found this to be super helpful. I remember one time I had to have a difficult call with somebody, and I could see their name ringing on my phone. And just before I picked up the phone, I was like, "I am enough." I just said it under my breath. And it just helped me ground myself to realize that whatever he said, my sense of worth wasn't on the line. It was going to be okay, because I am not my behavior. So it's a really small, simple thing, but it actually is really powerful. And you just keep reminding yourself of it. It's a small thing, but it definitely works. Totally do that. Yeah, totally do that. The other longer term strategy I'd like you to bear in mind or try out is to conduct a mini experiment. So you might choose your unhelpful belief, which is, I don't belong here, I'm not enough, or, and then you flip it. So you then say, I am enough, I do belong, I do feel supported. And then you look for evidence to support that, because we've been very good at looking for evidence to illustrate that we're not good enough. And that's what's caused this, gap between how we perceive ourselves and how other people perceives us. And so it's time for us to start to close that. And this is different from affirmations. It's because we're looking for evidence. It's a bit like the building up the votes again. And I found that as well to be really helpful. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Anne Lamott. She's a brilliant writer and very funny. I'll mention her in the book reading resources list. And she says that it's simple. She's got this metaphor which is all about, she carries another pair of glasses with her, because she's like, if sometimes she calls it heaven, because she is a Christian, and she says, sometimes heaven is a new pair of glasses. When we put them on, we see the awful person, and sometimes even ourselves, a bit more gently, and we're blessed in return. It seemed on the face of things like a decent deal. And I remember listening to her when she was going on a book tour, and she took 2 pairs of glasses with her. So if she was feeling a little bit unsettled or ungrounded, she'd simply just put a new pair of glasses on, and it really changed her way of being. And I thought that was a really good tip. So this is really all about changing our mindset. And mindset is the perception of ourselves. It's our attitudes, it's our beliefs, it's the framework that we're using to navigate the world. And it's important because how we perceive things affects how we behave. And I love this old fable. It's many of you might have heard it before. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson that there was a battle that goes on inside people. Excuse me. And he said, the battle is between 2 wolves. One is evil and anger and jealousy and sorrow and false pride and ego and superiority. And the other is joy and peace and love and generosity and serenity. And the grandson thought about it for a minute and then said, well, which wolf wins? And he simply replied, the one you feed. So I think this is so powerful, because ultimately we do have more agency than we think, possibly, than when we're, on the cusp of going, oh, I'm not good enough, or they're going to find me out, or it's only a matter of time. It's up to us then which path we go down. Which wolf are we going to feed? Are we going to go down the hope, the optimistic, the supportive, or are we going to go down the beating ourselves up and fueling our anxiety? So some other simple mindset shifts include, I'm not hurt, I'm healing. I'm not losing, I'm learning. I was not rejected, I was redirected. I'm not failing, I'm just getting feedback. So negative things happen, we can't stop them happening, but negative mindsets definitely make them harder. So I hope that was helpful. Just a few different things to think about, to bear in mind when where we're directing our attention, what we're paying attention to. So I want to share a framework with you now that I learned from the mindfulness teacher called Tara Brach, who has written many books, and you can find many of her talks online. And her framework is called RAIN, and the R stands for recognizing that we're caught feeling inadequate. So this is about dialing up our sensitivity. Oh God, I'm caught feeling anxious or inadequate. I'm going to give you the overview, and then we'll dig into it a little bit more. We've then got to try and allow that feeling, as uncomfortable as it is, can we just allow it to be here? We then want to investigate how it feels in our body, and then we want to nurture it. So learning how to respond to that feeling skillfully. Many of us have no idea how to respond to emotions because we simply weren't taught. So this is why we numb them with food and cigarettes and alcohol and shopping and social media. We just don't seem to be able to have the capacity to manage the feelings. And this can really help. So recognize we're caught up feeling inadequate. So the way that we do this is just try and slow right down and get curious about what it feels like in our body. Is it a tight, tightness in our chest? Are we tensing our shoulders? Is our belly tense? Where do you feel it's a breath short? And can we just take a breath and allow it to be here? Like, it's almost like I try and imagine it's like you're letting it be there. You're not letting it overtake you. You can just let it sit next to you, as it were. And then what we know from neuroscience is that if we're able to name the feeling, we are then able to bring on a different part of our brain, which helps us regulate the emotion. So it might be, oh, I'm feeling really worried. I'm feeling anxious. Sometimes before I do a big talk, I'll go, God, I'm feeling really nervous. It's okay, that nervousness can be here. And yeah, as I mentioned, that's enables us to get our prefrontal cortex online and helps us regulate the emotion more easily than just trying to numb it or just trying to suppress it. I wish it would go away. Why is it so here? Why is it bad? It's getting my way. It's going to make this go really badly. We can get into a real sort of panic when we are faced with a feeling like that. And then the other part to this is to then recognize that under that feeling, you're probably telling yourself a story. There might be a thought, for example, they're going to find me out. I'm going to be exposed any minute. I'll probably get fired tomorrow. This is probably my last project. All of that stuff. And can you just drop that in the moment and take a deep breath? And it's remarkable how powerful just those steps can be, because we just want to recognize that we're telling ourselves a story which is fueling some of these emotions. So then, can you just allow that feeling to be there? Can you just say, this too, or this belongs? If we're feeling very nervous, often it's because we care about something, we want something to go well. Often our fear of being found out, as we've seen, is often due to an old belief that we picked up when we were young and isn't necessarily true now. It can feel very real. These feelings can feel like we're in grave danger. We're not safe. And yet, if a Martian was to look at the situation and you'd have to describe, no, I am safe. I'm not in danger. Everything's fine. It's trying to be objective about what the situation is, what the current situation is. Then we really want to try and investigate it a little bit more. What most wants your attention? What am I believing? What does that vulnerable place want from me? What does it most need? And it might be just putting your hand on your heart, if that's appropriate. It might be just holding your own hand, just to try and start to learn how to self-soothe and bring your anxiety down. We want to learn how to breathe deeply. If you can inhale for 3 and out for 6, that again is just starting to try and regulate your emotions. And then how would you speak to a friend that was in a similar state? We've got to try and learn to be on our own side through these difficult moments. Do something kind for yourself if it's appropriate. Can you just go and make yourself a cup of tea with the sole objective of being on your own side, of being doing a kind, compassionate thing? Many of you mentioned that was one of the hallmarks of a good person, is that they were compassionate. So it's time to turn that to yourself. When we like ourselves, we make better choices. And that's certainly been the case for me. So I love what John Kabat-Zinn says. We can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. And certainly that rain framework has definitely helped me to surf those waves. So I'd love to know what you'll try. I realize I've covered quite a lot in that short time, but what do you think you're curious about having a go with? Might just be, yeah, feeding the right wolf, building up your self-worth. Yeah. Trying to name how you're feeling. Yeah. Tara Brach has been fantastic reading for me. Yeah. I love the Ray. Still, well, yeah, we're all still learning how to do it. You don't just master it once, it's a practice. Looking for evidence of how I'm enough and telling myself that. Feeding the good wolf. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Great. Flip the narrative. Super. Okay. I'm pleased to see that, because these things aren't difficult. They're actually really pleasant things, a lot of them. It's just that we're just not used to them. So let's now look at some strategies to manage our unhelpful thoughts so that we don't get consumed by them. And depending on how regulated we are, depending on how much ground we feel like is underneath us, sometimes just spotting that unhelpful thought is enough. We can just go, oh, it's just that critic voice again. And that's enough to realize it's just this old habitual way of thinking. And last time I asked you, how do you know, what does the imposter, when you're feeling like you're struck by an imposter attack, what are some of the things that you say to yourself? And this is what a lot of you said. So the reason I am showing this slide is because when you think that again, hopefully that will be a flashing sign to you. Oh, it's just an imposter thought. It's just an imposter thought. It's not true. It's just my old habitual way of thinking. Yes, it was there to keep me safe when I was small, but I'm not in danger now. I don't, thank you for trying to keep me safe. And yet I've got this now. I'm going to think a new thought. So remember, you are not your thoughts. And these 5 words have been really incredibly helpful to me, which is, I'm having the thought that this isn't going to go well. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. I'm having the thought that any minute I'm going to get exposed. And those 5 words can just help to create some space between you and the thinking and all that mental activity that's causing you a lot of stress in your brain, in your head, and your whole being. And yeah, it's remarkably good if you can remember to do it. So the other sort of faulty thinking you've got to watch out for is when you start generalizing, when you're using words like, oh, I always get so worried before these things, or I never feel like I've got any confidence. Always and never warning signs that the critic or that critical voice is at play. Things are rarely always and never. We mustn't try and develop this black and white thinking. Life is generally nuanced and grey and complex. All or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, and confusing feelings with facts. So things can feel very real but actually aren't true. And when we are habitual catastrophizers, we're like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. I won't be able to pay my mortgage. I'll probably end up under a bridge. We get into this really unhelpful spiraling thinking, and we just wind ourselves down. And these are why these skills to regulate ourselves are so important. And the learning how to breathe well, just in for 3 and out for 6, a few times, feeling your feet on the floor, feeling your bum on the seat, just helping you get into your body, out of your brain, out of your mind, can really, really help. And practices like, regular practice like yoga, regular practice like going out for a walk in nature, all help to regulate our systems. So which of those sort of faulty thinking strains do you recognize yourself the most? Are you a generalist? Are you like always and never person? Are you an all or nothing thinker? Are you a catastrophizer? And do you often confuse feelings with facts? All or nothing? Yeah. Yeah. You're a mix. Yeah. Feelings and facts. Yeah. It's definitely a practice to notice yourself feeling anxious or stressed and thinking that they're very that what we're feeling is a result of something very true, that people do think we aren't good enough, or that we are going to get found out, and we just need to try and tease those apart. Okay. I think the other thing that I've noticed, and this happens if we get into this downward spiral, is that when we look for evidence, which we've been doing most of our lives, that we're not good enough or we are going to get found out, what we're doing is we're grinding ourselves down a bit. And when we are in a sort of stressful state most of the time, it's very difficult for us to have security guards, as it were, on our mind. And so when we feel rested and have got some new tools, it's like we're tooling up and letting the security guards of our mind go, is this a helpful thought? Is it, which wolf are we feeding? And we're more able to do that when we feel resourced and we feel not so strung out and stressed. So really trying to develop your awareness around the sort of type of thoughts that you're letting in and you're generating yourself in your brain. Are they helpful or are they unhelpful, essentially? Which wolf are we feeding? And sometimes, yeah, we can just get stuck in this state of just letting any old rubbish in, and that can feed this anxious cycle that we can get stuck in. So remember, sometimes it's just a case of spotting that unhelpful thought. Create some space between you and your thoughts, which is, I'm having the thought that, amazingly powerful. And then, yeah, just try and develop your discernment around what's helpful and what's not so helpful. So in terms of longer term strategies to help us think more positive thoughts, we really can change the structure of our brain. And the field of neuroscience has really come on leaps and bounds in the recent years. They used to think that the brain was very fixed, and that's where the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And yet what we now know is actually, when a neuron is the brain cells, when you think a new thought, it's essentially sending a charge of electricity down a neural pathway. And you see that gap there, they're two neurons firing together. So when you think a new thought, that's what's happening. And that, of course, is very energy. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of energy for our brain to think new thoughts, which is why learning is really tiring. But because the energy wants to be conserved, what the brain does is it ends up, once we've thought that thought a few times, it will then coat that gap in white fat. That's a process called myelination. So that means the thought can whiz down that pathway much more easily and much more quickly without taking so much effort. And so that's how we're able to change the structure of our brain, by thinking these new thoughts. And it's like laying cables, it's like laying pathways. Sometimes when we're like chopping down jungle and we're carving our way through, once we've got that pathway, it's easier for us to think new thoughts. But it does take practice. And that's why they say what fires together wires together. And interestingly, when the brain is forging these new pathways, what's happening to the old thoughts, the unhelpful thoughts, is that they start to wither away. Those pathways start to die back. So we really can change the structure of our brain by directing our thoughts, by feeding the right wolf. This is how we end up changing the structure of our brain. And this is why, when you understand that, developing a growth mindset is much easier, because we can see that when we're learning something, it is tiring, but we understand what's happening in our brain when we're learning something new. We're forging our way through that jungle. And I don't know if you probably I'd imagine you do the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset essentially believes that we are born with a certain fixed amount of talent or intelligence, and once we've got those, they can't be developed. And that means that often, if we're in that kind of mindset, we don't want to try and do new things. We worry about exposing ourselves because we feel like if we're not good at it now, we're probably not going to be good at it later. So we really want to adopt a growth mindset. And when we go in a growth mindset, we go for mastery, not perfection. And we use the word yet a lot. So I can't do it yet. I haven't mastered it yet. And I think this is a super helpful approach to learning, to trying new things, to changing the relationship with yourself. So even if you fall off the wagon a little bit and start beating yourself up, just remember, just try and be kind to yourself. This is going to take practice, and you're forging those new pathways. So, that's what I'm asking of you. And Carol, in her book Mindset, says, when you're learning something, you just picture your brain forming those new connections. That's why it feels challenging, and that's why it feels tiring. So just keep on going, because the more we think those helpful thoughts, the more they're going to be myelinated, and the easier it becomes. It's just we've had a lifetime of the other pathways being myelinated. So I'd like to ask you now, these were some of the unhelpful thoughts that you mentioned last time. What are you going to think instead? When that comes up, what is a more helpful replacement? I can learn how to do this. I will overcome this and get there. Yeah. How could I do this? Yes. Which wolf? Let's make a plan to do this. I don't know how to do this yet, but I will. Take one step at a time. Yeah. I'm working hard and I will improve. Yeah. Great. I am the good wolf. Great. Make a plan. Yeah. Yeah, you see, there's just so much more agency, so much more energy in those thoughts rather than these, which are just so debilitating and energy sapping and stressful. I am enough. Good, 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 good. So, in summary, by directing your attention in kind and encouraging and supportive ways, you're strengthening those new pathways and you're weakening the old critical ones. Where your where your focus goes, energy flows. So we know that. That's another sort of shorter way of talking about neuroplasticity. And I love this quote from Gandhi, who says, your thoughts become your beliefs, become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. So by changing some of those beliefs that we've got and our thoughts, we then start speaking to ourselves more kindly, and probably to others as well. We start acting in kinder ways. So, learning how to self-soothe ourselves when we're feeling inadequate. Maybe, sometimes it's nice to have a first aid kit, really, of what to do when you're feeling triggered or emotional. Having a nice playlist, running a bath, going for a walk in the woods, or even just taking time out. And, if you need to remove yourself from a situation, just pop into the bathroom, or just doing something that works for you, just to regulate yourself. And ultimately that can become a kind of habitual response to regulating your emotions. We'll talk a bit more about values next time. Yeah, but we've covered quite a lot already. Lastly, I just want to cover some quick things that you can respond, how you sort of talk to yourself in the midst of an attack. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on your own system. But really, when that critic is fired up and going for it, sometimes it can be helpful to respond. When it says, you're not worthy of love or you're not good enough, saying something like, I don't have to be perfect to receive love and belonging. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's worthy of love and belonging. So why am I an exception to that? When you haven't achieved something, or, it hasn't gone quite the way you hoped, I'm doing my best right now, and I'm going to let that be good enough. This is about showing up and, focusing on the process rather than the outcome. When you failed and it says you're a failure, if I fail, it means I was brave enough to take a risk, and I'm able to make myself vulnerable. And there is no failure. There's only feedback. And something doesn't go to plan, which we'll be looking at a bit more next time. What can we learn from it? How can we be chuffed with ourselves that we put ourselves out there, that we did something for the first time, that we moved slightly out of our comfort zone? When it shows up and tells you that you're weak, I am supposed to be feeling all the feelings, and I'm allowed to feel this in the moment. And when it starts to tell you that you're not good enough, there's no way, how do you know if you're good enough? At what point do you feel like, okay, no, I feel enough now? It's a very difficult thing to measure. But it's a good question for you to reflect on. And there's no way that we can prove or disprove our worthiness. It's a birthright, because we're worthy because we're born. So, yeah, just a few things there. I think sometimes sometimes we can get, if we get involved in a kind of argument in our head, it can work, and sometimes it's better to just remove yourself from a situation and focus on regulating your breathing to get your state in a better state, and then it's more likely that you're able to think more helpful thoughts. So I want to make sure that we've got lots of time for questions. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, but let's just recap what we've gone over. We've began by looking at strategies and skills to relate to feelings of inadequacy. So thinking about the type of comparing you're doing. Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it aspirational comparing? Or is it evaluative to your current situation where you've come off worse? Pay attention to where you're paying attention. Look for evidence that you do belong, that you are enough, that you do have what it takes. And practice using the RAIN framework when you're triggered or when you're feeling a lot of anxiety. When it comes to strategies and skills for managing unhelpful thoughts, I'm having the thought that enormously helpful. Just create some space between you and the unhelpful thought. And then you're just going, oh, it's just a thought, I'll think new thoughts. It doesn't mean that it's true. Do what you can to develop this growth mindset. Be in love with the process, not the outcome. Learn, we're in this to develop mastery, not perfection. Our sense of worth isn't on the line here. We have worth because we were born. And you've got some things now to respond if you get stuck in a kind of barrage of unhelpful thinking. You've got some tools now to respond. So I'd just like to finish with the quote from Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if any of you read any of the Stoics. He says, if you're distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but your estimate of it. And this is where you have the power to revoke it at any moment. So yeah, it's all about using the tools that you've got now, practicing them, and changing how you relate to yourself and how you talk to yourself. So before the last part, remember to jot down 3 things that you like and respect about yourself each day. Create a list of soothing activities that you can do when you're just feeling a bit vulnerable. Practice speaking kindly to yourself. Practice getting some space from your unhelpful thoughts. Part 4 is next Thursday at 1 o'clock, where we're going to be looking at resilience and rethinking risk-taking. Thank you for putting that in the chat. And yeah, if you haven't got my kind of reminder, you can access it there. Essentially, it's a fortnightly newsletter where I just try and remind you to be kind to yourself with poems and quotes and questions. And wisdom from wise people. So, any questions or reflections? I'd love to know what's resonated with you, or if anything hasn't been clear. You can do that through the chat. The wolf memory tag. Yeah, I like that I'm in the growth mindset. Yeah. The three things is a great idea. Good. It's super simple. I think that's the key thing to developing a habit, as we know, making it simple, making it easy, making it attractive, making it fun. Okay, well, if you've got you hopefully all got my email. If you don't want to ask me a question here, then let me just double check there aren't. Oh, hang on, there might be a question here. Okay, how do you respond when other people's actions or behaviors make you feel the negative feelings, as over time this has really knocked my feeling of self-worth, self-value and confidence? I think when it's other people saying that to you, I think sometimes if you can try and, what does it say about them that they're making you feel this way? Uh, I think it might be because they're worried about you. Maybe they're trying to they've run you down because they're trying to build you up and trying to motivate you. I think ultimately it's trying to recognize that you've got a security guard on your mind and you don't have to let that in. Other people can say and say some pretty harmful things, and it's up to us whether we let them in or not. I've sort of this funny joke of Dolly Parton is coming to mind when someone said, what did she say? Something like, are you fed up of the dumb blonde jokes? And she was like, the stupid dumb blonde. No, and she said, no, because I ain't dumb and I ain't blonde. And I just thought that was so good because she's not getting triggered by that. It's other people's business what they think of her. But I'm happy to talk to you in greater depth about how that has knocked you. But hopefully you've got some tools now to build up your own sense of self-worth and where you can direct your attention and what you're able to let in. Easier said than done, but with practice, it genuinely does work. It's helped with a security guard for the mind. Okay, good. What if it feels like you're faking it till you make it? It's probably going to feel like that to begin with. But if you remember if you were on part one, what we were looking at is who is the type of person that you want to become, and what is a small thing that you could do that would prove that would be evidence for that. So I would just try and start small. So it might be sending an email to somebody asking for something that you wouldn't normally do because you wouldn't have the confidence to, or just start super small, because it will feel a bit cringy to begin with. But I think if you can try and reframe that cringy, awkward feeling of doing something for the first time as evidence that you are developing and expanding your comfort zone, and you get almost trying to reframe it as you're getting a bit of a kick out of it. It's evidence that you're growing and you're developing. So you probably are going to feel like you're faking it because you've never done it before, but it's about how you frame that thing that you're doing for the first time. So that's probably what I would say to that. I've always started with the problem is me standpoint, of course. Yeah. And I now try and start with where is the problem? It could be the other person. Yeah. Absolutely. I think sometimes it's been easy for other people to treat us in a certain way because it makes them feel good. And yeah, I remember hearing, I think it was Brené Brown said something like hurt people hurt people. So when people are being horrible to us, or it's mainly because they're in pain. And can we have some compassion for them because they haven't got the tools or the regulation or the self-awareness to be able to handle that well? Unfortunately, we might be getting the brunt of it. But yeah, you are not the problem. You are not, you are definitely not the problem. And yeah, I hope that has come through loud and clear. I've been told before that to a degree, we're all faking it till we make it to various degrees. I think we are. I think, as I mentioned in part one, when we are doing creative work and innovation, that's never been done before. So there's always going to be a degree of uncertainty and uh, uh, how 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 could we know everything? So yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. If somebody tries to hurt me, I reply, "Are you okay?" Yeah. If you've got the ground and the capacity to do that in a tone that is compassionate and curious, I think that's a remarkably powerful response. So yeah, thank you. Remembering that we are comparing our internal with others' external. Yeah, that's right. And probably a lot of you, I would imagine, have got quite good at appearing like swans because you've risen to a certain stage in your career and you probably are all achieving great things. And inside, you might be feeling like a swan and flapping, but outside, you probably give the impression that you've got this and you're quite capable, and people have no idea what's going on inside. So yes. Any tips on identifying the type of person you want to become? Well, I mean, that's such a personal question. I think it will relate to your values, which we are going to be discussing next time. And perhaps, that first question that I asked you around how do you know if someone is a good person? I think reflecting on what makes you happy, where do you feel fulfilled, what makes you unhappy, where are you miserable, and starting to piece together a bit of a picture about where you feel fulfilled and happy, playing to your strengths, doing meaningful work, having a great community of friends and things are some of the pieces of the puzzle. Let's check the time. Oh, we've got a few more minutes now if anyone's got anything else. No. Okay. Well, I don't want to keep you here longer than necessary. So I hope you'll join me for the last session. It's been a great program. I've loved all your input and your reflections. So yeah, all the best putting those into practice. And I'll see you next week.